Okay, it is. Hi, everybody. So I assume you can see the Salish Sea Guillemot Network title page here. Okay, great. Um, so you're going to see quite a few charts after this slide. So for those of you who like charts, it's going to be great, but it could be death by 1,000 cuts for some of you. Like, I hope not. These are preliminary results for this season's survey. All of the data hasn't been checked yet, but what you'll see is probably pretty accurate. I doubt it will change much after this, if at all. And mostly what you'll see are results for just this last season, this last breeding season. We do have historical data for a lot of the regions, but we're still getting that transferred over into our new Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife system, and it's not ready to really analyze at this point. So Brennan talked about the Salish Sea Guillemot Network, and this is who it is. And the year spans after the names are the numbers of years that there's been an ongoing survey at each region. And we're welcoming a new region. Actually, they did some surveys this year that we'll be incorporating, but they are truly joining us next year, Jefferson County East. So it's real. I think possibly we're in 9 or 10 counties around the Salish Sea, it's really a great effort and really providing a lot of super information about what's happening with the pigeon guillemots in the Salish Sea. A few definitions to cover here, just so that some of the charts make sense to you. I know when I started, I am on a beach here on Whidbey Island called Fort Casey North. And I did a couple of seasons of data collection before I had any sense of what was happening with the data or why we were collecting what we were collecting. So I know a lot of you know the answer to that, but some of you are probably new and don't really know what's happening with the data. And Scott Pearson will certainly talk to that later, but this is what we're doing locally with the data. So this first one, PGE population for a region, we determine what that is by taking the maximum PG count for the season at a colony and adding that to all of the maximum PG counts for all the other colonies for that region to arrive at what we call the PG population for that region. An active burrow, that's a burrow that we have seen a PG enter, which we take to mean that there is an attempt to breed in that burrow. There's an attempt by a pair of pigeon guillemots to breed. And a chick burrow, that is a burrow which we've seen a pigeon guillemot enter with prey. So if we see that, we know that there is at least a chick in that burrow. So that is a subset of active burrow. So if you take active burrows and subtract the chick burrows, what you're left with are burrows that didn't produce chicks and pairs of pigeon guillemots that didn't produce chicks. These are some quick statistics from this last season. So there are 6 regions. There were 67 colonies surveyed. There are 699 surveys performed, that is a big number. That's just really impressive. And 3,671 hours spent doing that. The total pigeon guillemot population across the region, 2,183, with 423 active burrows and 275 burrows that volunteers saw pigeon guillemots enter with prey. And the total prey counted was over 1,000. So that could definitely make our potluck delicious. This first chart here is PG populations per region. And the last bar here is the total for the Salish Sea for our 6 regions. And there's a lot of variation between regions and how many PGs are counted. And a lot of that is due to just how many colonies there are. Camino, for instance, has, which is a new region, pretty new. It's been active a couple of years, was surveying a single colony this year. So it's not necessarily a true indication of how many PGs are in the waters about that region. But at Whidbey Island, for instance, we have a really mature survey going. We have 26 colonies, 28 colonies this year. So we were capturing a large percentage of the pigeon guillemots in our waters. This, by the way, this slide deck will be sent out to the region leads, and they can send it out to their volunteers. So I'm not going to talk to this slide, but it's a bunch of data rolled up for each region. And there's another slide that rolls up the data for each colony. So if you're interested in your particular colony, that'll be included in this slide deck. So this slide shows the population of pigeon guillemots from week to week over the season. So down here on the at the bottom is the week of the year, and this little area up here gives you an idea of what times we're talking about with these weeks of the year. This is kind of a nice way of managing of showing the season over time. So here again, you see that the populations are pretty constant over the main part of the season, and then as chicks fledge, the pigeon guillemots start to leave the waters around the colony, and by the end of the season, they're all gone basically. Where do they go? I don't know. Ask Scott Thompson that question. Pearson, I'm sorry. This slide shows the breeding percentages for this last year at each of the regions. And I need to move something there. The dark orange is PGs attempting to breed as a percentage of the total PG population at that region. And the lighter, the yellowish, is the percentage of breeding PGs as a percentage of the PGs at that region. So you'll see that the average year for all of the regions is about 25% of this last bar here is about 25% of the total PGs counted have a burrow and are delivering prey to that burrow. And this number here for this orange one for the region is just under 40%, probably 39%. And those are the PGs that we saw. That's a percentage of PGs that we saw entering burrows. So this 25% figure, not a bad figure, I think. 25% of all of the pigeon guillemots are actively feeding chicks. And we track this, at Whidbey, we track this year to year, and I think we have a slide that shows that. This is this is for Whidbey. I've thrown a couple of Whidbey slides in here just so you can see over time how the data begins to have significance, because you can see trends in what's happening. And this slide shows the number of chick burrows that we have counted at Whidbey from 2008 through 2021 through this year. And there in this area, the first, I don't know, 8-10 years, we had a higher number of, we counted a higher number of chick burrows. And we've had a kind of a, since 2017, we've had a bit of a decline in the number of chick burrows we've counted. And this year it popped up a bit again. So of course, we're anxious to see what the trend will be, anxious to see next year. This slide takes a little bit of description. This is also a Whidbey slide for the same period, 2008 to 2021. And the blue line here is the percentage of pigeon guillemots attempting to breed for each year. The dark blue line here is the percentage of pigeon guillemots breeding, so actively feeding chicks for those years. And the percentages are over here on the right axis. The columns, the gray columns, are the number of PGs, the PG population for that year, for each of the years. And the left column, or the left axis, tells the number of that. So here again, you can see at Whidbey, we've had a gradual decline in the number of pigeon guillemots that are successfully breeding as a percentage of the population. Back here in 2013, the percentage of breeding PGs was about 35%, and this year it was 24%. This is kind of this one here is a pretty fun chart if you have a lot of years to show. So again, the horizontal axis on this chart are weeks of the year, so weeks of the season. Week 23 is generally what we call the first season of the year, or first week of the year, June 7th through 13th. Sometimes it's the very beginning of June. And for each region, each line is the prey delivery for a region. So this blue line, the dark blue, is Whidbey. This lighter blue here is South Sound. This gray one is Clallam. And Vashon and Kitsap Bainbridge and Camino are down here, monitoring fewer colonies. And generally what you'll see, if you have a bunch of years and you throw all of those years together and you plot it, you'll have a pretty nice curve that goes up just like this, and the peak of that will be in the mid-July to early to mid-August time period for Whidbey. It's not the same for all of the regions. For South Sound, you'll see that their peak is probably a little bit earlier than Whidbey, and Clallam might be a little bit later, and that probably has to do with regional temperatures. But that's another thing to study. But anyway, putting the region delivery rates together like this can show some differences that lead to questions about, well, why is it that way? Let's try and figure that out. So we monitor in this survey basically three types of prey: sculpin, gunnel, and anything else that we couldn't figure out what it was, or it was something besides sculpin and gunnel, we put in the other category. So this slide shows for each of the regions for this year the proportion of basically gunnels to sculpins, and pretty gunnel rich. And gunnels, and this is probably for Scott Pearson as well, but gunnels are a much more beneficial food source than sculpins. So presumably pigeon guillemots would favor getting gunnels over sculpins if they're available for their chick. And they also present less of a hazard to chicks for getting stuck in throats. So I would think that a high gunnel rate is a great thing, but at Whidbey, I don't have the chart for this, but over the last several years, over about the last 5 or 6 years, the proportion of gunnels to sculpin has been decreasing. And in fact, 2 years ago, there were more sculpins delivered to chicks than gunnels. And this year it's kind of righted itself again, more gunnels than sculpins. But that would be another, a study based on what are the food sources for PGs could illuminate, what's happening in the greater Salish Sea, and what is the availability of foods for seabirds. And that last slide, I'll bring it up here. This is I'm not going to talk to it, but this is the colony data, and this will be included in the slide deck if you'd like this slide deck. So if you're interested in what your colony did relative, or what it's like relative to other colonies, or just want to see the data for your colony, it's included here. So that is it. And if I can, I will get out of this.
Awesome, Dave. Thank you so much for doing that. Let me pull up the chat here. Okay, so we've got some questions. So Maria asked what the dip that we saw in week 29.
Yeah, that was really interesting. It looked kind of like an inverted Pac-Man there. So I went back and looked at the notes in our survey 1, 2, 3 surveys, and a couple of people noted that tides were really low that survey period, and there has been some conjecture that low tides inhibit pigeon guillemots from delivering. I'm not sure why that would be, but it's something that people have noticed, or they think they've noticed over time here on Whidbey. And there were also a couple of colonies that basically they started early and ended early. For instance, one colony delivered 13 prey the week before that, and then was done that week. So that accounted for a third of that dip. But it's not really, I don't think we've really understood completely why that happened, and maybe we won't. It is rare. It hasn't happened to that extent before in the 13 years that we've been doing this.
Yeah, and this doesn't really add much to that, but there's seasonal variances, all over the place in lots of populations, and you can see, different weather events that affect breeding.
I'm looking at Paulina Barry's statement about maybe the smoke and heat of the week affected the birds' activity levels. Yeah, if that was then, yeah, that could be a possibility. Francis Wood wondered if the heat wave earlier in June might have had some impact on the breeding cycle. So that's another possibility.
Jenny, that's a big question. Why do we monitor pigeon guillemots? I think there's a lot of answers to that, but I think on the whole, and I imagine that Scott Pearson is going to kind of talk about this a little bit. You know, one of the biggest reasons is they're a breeding seabird that's all across Puget Sound, which is actually not super common. They're the only alcid that breeds in a lot of Puget Sound, minus some big islands here and there. Their mode of breeding is not quite as, they don't breed in giant colonies in a lot of cases. We have some big colonies on Whidbey Island, and actually out, looks like you're in Squim. So there's some bigger colonies that direction. But on the whole, because they aren't easy to study like some seabirds, you go to an island, you go to Protection Island, and there's your study population. They're kind of spread out. So they haven't always gotten as much attention. You know, when this study started, you know, that was part of the idea was, well, there's this whole group of birds that isn't getting nearly as much attention. So that's an answer. There's multiple answers. There's some more stuff coming in question-wise. Dave, are you seeing those questions?
Right. The statements about doing a correlation between tides and deliveries is we've been discussing that, and we do have some historical data that would lend itself to doing that. I think you kind of need maybe more than an hour look, so that you can see the impact of a tide change over the same day, to see if that has an impact on the frequency of deliveries during that extended survey. But there are a lot of really clever people at UW, and they're working with our data, and we may be able to get somebody to look in depth at that question.
Yeah, I'm just in general, even if we don't have answers to all the things or the questions that people are throwing out, I just like seeing all the thoughts that folks are having about all of this. Yeah, and Demi was asking about, you know, why the extended season on Whidbey, and you know, more colonies definitely offers more opportunity. And maybe Dave, maybe Francis, you have thoughts about why there's colonies that breed later, why there's colonies that start later, those kinds of things. I don't personally have the answer to that, and I'm not sure that anyone really does. Our
early colonies are the warmest colonies.
Okay.
So that appears there again, though. That's hypothesis. You know, we haven't studied that, but that seems to certainly be the case. That the sooner it gets warm, the sooner you have breeding at a colony.
Good exposure.
If I could just add a little bit to that, Brendan, what Dave means by warmer is that we have colonies on the north side of Penn Cove, and therefore they have a southern exposure. And those are traditionally the first ones that start up. And then given that Whidbey is such a long, skinny island, we also have east and west sides. And so there's a lot of different terrain and habitat that might affect that.
I'm looking at Barbara Brock's comment about saying the Camino colony is in especially shallow water, so low tide seems to really affect deliveries. So that would be another variable to throw into that tide study, would be the how sloped the floor is of the sound. That would have to be taken into account too. So it's not totally simple, right? These things, it's a bit complex, but universities are really capable of doing this.
Totally.